Well, welcome back to another episode of the Krish Marketing Podcast for all of our real estate agents, mortgage brokers, mortgage loan offices, and just industry folks that hopefully love to listen to the Krish Marketing Podcast. Today we have a guest, Matthew Marx, who actually I just literally found out prior to this conversation, lives down the street between Dallas and Austin, a couple of hours. But you might be the first guest that lives in the same state that I live in. So that's a first for us. But Matthew is the CEO of Evocalize. And let me tell you a little bit about Evocalize. It's unlocking a multi-billion-dollar channel marketing opportunity with their software. It helps partners collaborate to execute compliant data-driven marketing programs. And their clients include some of the world's biggest real estate and financial services companies. And also they're in the restaurant industry as well, backed by Madrona Venture Group and the National Association of Realtors. So Matthew or Matt or Yoda, I've heard you've been called before. Welcome to our show.
Krish, thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be on. I listen to you guys, and I'm excited to talk to you today about fun housing related items.
Isn't it fun? I've always really just geeked out on marketing, but real estate and mortgage is where I've spent 20 plus years of my career, Matthew. And it's interesting because many of us were in this world pre-trade and pre all these regulations and CFPB and all of the things and the meltdown. And from that were born so many different regulations. And a lot of the folks that I work with on a day-to-day basis still to this day, like, hey, remember the good old days, right? And then you come into this world where, I tell people that are entering into the mortgage industry that have never been in it before, it's like working at Fort Knox, right? It's like, a gated armored door trying to get in to figure out how to do the next thing. Well, recently, back in December, and I know this is a topic that you, for lack of better words, geek out on, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, proposed a brand new rule, or a number of rules, but one specifically was the closing the lead generation loophole. I know that there's like a ton of different things related to this. Matthew, why don't you kick us off with what is it that changed in December? And then we'll get into some really deep dives on how the impacts of it.
Sure thing. Krish, where do I start? So the first thing I'll say is that this change has flown under the radar in the housing industry. I think because there's just so much going on in housing right now. I mean, you have, the commission trials, and lawsuits, and then you have interest rates and inventory levels and gosh, for those in the real estate industry, the cherry on top is maybe the NAR, what's going on with the NAR. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And so I think the FCC changes have flown under the radar. So first, thanks for bringing this awareness out to the industry, because no matter where you sit on the pendulum, you're likely to be impacted by this, and it's going to come pretty fast. So let me explain a little bit of background, and then we can get into some of the impacts, if you'd like, the real world impacts that this is likely to have.
Absolutely.
So the FCC is obviously a governmental entity. They've been around for a long time. In 1991, there was a law called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, TCPA, that was passed. And this is a time, if you were even around back then, in the listening audience, you remember we were pulling phones off of walls with cords and wandering around. And this law was passed originally to try and prevent the phone in your home, the one phone in your home, from ringing off the hook all day and all night. Right. And so there were a lot of rules put in to this TCPA in its first iteration that related to automatically calling these home phone numbers, right? And so this TCPA law has evolved some since 1991, but it hasn't gotten all the way to where we are today, where everyone's carrying a device that they can be contacted on, 24 hours a day, walking around, in their pocket. And so this spam issue. I'm sure most folks have experienced texts and calls and your kind of phone buzzing like crazy. This thing kind of finally bubbled up, and there are a bunch of reasons for that I can get into. But this problem got big enough that a couple years ago, the FCC formed a working group that looked at how do we get a handle on this spam problem for specifically robocalls and robotexts, which they identified were a big kind of problem statement here. And so that group has been working for a couple years to try and dig into the problem and figure out how they can change or guide the TCPA laws to be more modern and try and limit the amount of spam that's coming to all of our phones, which I'm sure I can certainly appreciate personally, right?
Right.
So that's a little bit of the history of this. And then you mentioned on December 13th, this working group produced what they call an order. And the order did a number of things. It held telecom communication companies responsible and gave them some more power to cut off spammers at the source and international spammers in particular. And so there were a lot of things in there. But in particular, there were two things, and one really big one that will impact the real estate and housing industry writ large. And that's called they're attempting to close what they call the lead aggregator or lead generator loophole. And so happy to explain what I mean, because it's not super, obvious what lead aggregator or lead generator means to everyone. I can give some examples and dig in on that, Krish. But
yeah. Well, going back a little bit. So for the audience, numbers mean everything, especially in our industries, right? So we like numbers, we like big numbers. And I was pulling some information about, why some of the reasons why, aside from, the robocalls, but what harm has come to the industry and the consumers. And the Federal Trade Commission puts the harm to consumers for scam text messages at $326 million. And that was a number from 2022, because again, this was the prior year's research, and that happened in December 13th of 23. The other sources, right, so outside of the FCC doing the research, find that harm at over $20 billion. That is unfathomable, right? Because we look at our phones, we pay a certain amount, right? $100 a month, let's just say. And we have kind of been programmed at this point to be spammed. And the text messages, and I like to say in an election year, you get a ton more. The phone numbers, the companies have done some work, right, to help your computer have enough technology to identify scam calls now, right, especially on an iPhone. But we still can't get through them. There's so much. As fast as the regulations came, 10x to figure out how. I mean, this is the basic hacking world, right?
That's right.
So I just want to throw those numbers out there because it is kind of an eye opener. It's like, that's money, that the harm that's coming to us. And as a mortgage company and previous organizations, Matt, we've tried to incorporate TCPA and all these things. Each state has various regulations and things like that. But from a federal standpoint, it wasn't. It's been some years since they've really taken any action.
Yeah.
And so I find it interesting that now is the time, and it is the time. But moving into lead gen, and this is such a tough topic for me, Matthew, because I got into marketing because of lead generation, because of spamming. I'll be honest. I used to consult with real estate agents, so actually DUI attorneys, criminal attorneys, defense attorneys, and then I went into lead generation for real estate agents. So it's like, who else needs leads, right? Now, they were still organic. It wasn't stuff that like I was selling, on a platform, which we're used to. But I built this MySQL PHP website, I remember, and I was like, okay, I got a form. How do I get people to retain their information and build this database? And I learned it at Barnes and Nobles. I read books and figured out how to do it.
That's awesome. I love that story.
Thank you. That's kind of how I was intrigued, right? naturally the progression went from real estate to mortgage. If you can market in mortgage, you've won life, because it's the toughest place to market. And over the years, lead generations and different organizations have put different values or focus on lead gen. I've been at an organization that converted $6-7 billion in lead gen before, right? I've been at companies that don't allow it. But what's interesting today is we are kind of utilizing the same core group of these lead aggregators. And 2020, 21, and most of 22, no one was really buying leads, right? It drove the cost of leads up because no one was buying. And because there's so much refinance business. Today, or in 2023, we saw a complete shift of the reason why people weren't buying leads. And it was just for the sheer fact that they were so expensive for the most part, because inventory and rates. Now you add this other wrench. And so tell us about what the impact specifically for mortgage and real estate is on lead purchase on the aggregators that we're used to using.
Yeah. So super cool background, by the way. I didn't know you had the lead background. I love the scrappy figure it out kind of mode. So first of all, in the prior world, all the lead aggregators, basically you can think of them as like a rate comparison website in the mortgage space. It's not limited to that, but that's a good kind of common example that I know, but for the listeners. And then this spans industry. So this law was not created or this order was not passed specifically for the housing vertical, although it was mentioned in some of the opinions that that came out after the vote. But getting back to the point, in this, up until this law's passage, as a lead generator rate comparison website, for example, you could do a lot of marketing, paid marketing, and get a consumer to come in and submit a lead, and then you could go on the back end and sell that lead hundreds of times. And a lot of folks did that, not just, by the way, in the lending industry, but in lots of industries. So you could take that lead as a lead aggregator and sell it. It's like, I like to joke in the real estate industry of like imagine you're listing a home for sale and you could accept all of the offers for that home and sell it to everyone at once. Like you would do that if you could, and you had found a way to do it, because you would make a lot more commission fees if you could monetize that home over and over again. And that's what the lead aggregators did. And what this law has done is really tighten the clamps down. So now any marketing and any content that's associated with the marketing to generate a lead has to be contextual to the people who are being sold the lead and the communications to the consumer. Meaning, if it's about rates, the communication needs to be about rates and housing and all that. That's one. And the more impactful thing, Krish, is there needs to be a one-to-one opt-in from the consumer submitting the lead. So whereas before, you as an aggregator, you could generate a lead and then sell it to a lot of people. Now the consumer has to go and opt in to check boxes in order to specifically allow enumerated customers like loan officers to call them and text them via automated or technological means. So that's the change, and the impact we think will be twofold. We think lead volumes are going to shrink in the industry, because how many times is the consumer going to check the box? How many people do they really want to contact them? And one, and then two, we think that the lead supply and demand, that the prices will rise, and the quality of those one or two or three leads that come out of the one contact will be higher, because you're not going to be barraging the customer with 100 robocalls or robotexts at the end of the day. So specifically to answer your question, we think those are some of the results that will come out of this order when it's enforced.
Well, I can't wait, right? Because I've, the few times I've purchased a home, I wasn't always in the mortgage business, and I got blasted. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I run tests, right? And I'll put in a fake email address or whatever, and see how it, the form journey works, whatever. And what a weird transition, okay? Because it's, I feel like, and specifically in the mortgage industry, there are some bigger companies that figured it out and will make this change quick. But there's a lot of mortgage companies, real estate companies, restaurants, whoever, insurance companies, they are likely to hope and wish that this thing's just going to go away. Right. And that, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of industries, not specific to mortgage, but a lot of industries that are slow to adopt. Okay. And so it was like the SMS opt-in. And I know you have a huge background in mobile and SMS. And, but people still have not adopted to that.
I know.
And
Yep.
this specific thing, because we are all about truth in lending and all of those things, right? And it has to be apparent to the consumer who they're working with. This is no different to me than that, but it's not also in our control, right? So what we do one-on-one organic, whether it's Facebook ads or whatever, you're generating leads, that's not what this is, right? This is truly the Zillows and Lending Trees and all those guys, MRCs, the big generators. You guys have a platform for this type of business as well. How quickly is it whoever figures it out first is the winner, or is it as you're in this line of business, is it a round table discussion with these other leaders on how to collectively, because you're a month into this conversation now, how's that progress look? I know this wasn't one of the show item questions.
No, it's great. This is great. And in fact, like the listeners probably don't know, at Evocalize, we work on both sides of the coin, actually, because a lot of the portals and lead generators and aggregators use our lead generation automation technology to generate the leads that they then package up and resell to the industry, so that they're affected, right? And we're affected with them and sitting at the table, as you mentioned, figuring it out. And then we also exist at the other level, which you mentioned, for a lender who wants to equip their LOs with the ability to generate one-to-one leads themselves. We sit on that side. So we're kind of on both sides of the coin. It's an interesting spot to be. And to your point, there were some folks, really large portals, that were caught kind of unaware that this was coming, like like an LO or like a realtor.
Right.
But most of them knew. Most of the big folks, that like the ones you're mentioning, have known it was coming for a little while, for at least months, right? And so you can actually see, when you look at some of their business strategy movements, you can see them adjusting, making acquisitions, changing products, and so they're adjusting, because every one of them will be impacted to some extent by this rule. If you think about, you could sell one lead for $50, 100 times to everything, including a home improvement store chain, and all of a sudden you can only sell it 3 times because those are the only number of times that the consumer opts in for people to call them. That's a pretty big difference in your bottom line if you're thinking about like your actual business and from a lead aggregation standpoint. And so for me, that is the impact that we're talking about, Krish, is like those folks they are already changing their packaging, pricing, offerings. They're not going to be likely to offer some of the things they offered, like aged leads. A lot of the portals would offer leads that got old, right? That are a couple days old. Because if you're not in the first 15 minutes historically of calling the consumer, because they were being called 100 times at once, you lost out, right? And some people argued it was 30 seconds, right? And so that's going to change. But I'm with you that I'm even though we're impacted by some of this, I think it's a pro for the consumer. And over time, my hope is it rebuilds trust, so people don't put in fake information because they want to be called. That's the whole reason you're submitting the lead. You want, Krish, and you want Kind Lending to call you, right? Because that's why I'm submitting my lead to begin with. And so that's really, I think, over time it will heal, I think, and repair the relationship that we have with online leads.
So that's over time on the consumer side. On the folks that are using or have built a business model around lead generation, whether it's in our industry or a related industry or outside, what should they be doing? Because I had a question. I put this on TikTok, actually. I was like, hey, I'm going to be talking to Matthew Marx. Got any questions? I got a DM. And the question was, when this regulation it kicks off live, what is, I don't know what, June, July,
It's actually been bumped out a little bit now. So
has it,
it was originally going to be May, and now it's December, January.
oh
So we have a
wow,
little more time to adjust. Yeah.
good. Well, but the question specific was, who is going to be in violation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is
Yep.
it the aggregator themselves
Mhm.
that didn't, establish the process and didn't do their due diligence in communicating with the lead purchaser, or is it the person that called and
Yeah.
texted?
Yeah. I think to answer your question, we've been having this discussion with lead aggregators and brokerages and teams and
Mhm,
kind of downstream folks. Um, I think potentially it's both, but I think in the
mhm,
short term, it's the lead aggregators that are most in the target of the FCC and the regulators.
mhm,
And we think, to your earlier point about laggards, folks not adjusting their flows, those that don't. We think that the FCC is going to look to make, when the enforcement window goes into place, roughly a year from now, a little bit
mhm,
less than that. We think they're going to look to make some examples with some really high dollar lawsuits related to this to prove something. And so I think both sides are really affected by this. I think what's going to happen based on conversations with the lead aggregators, they're likely to put some some more disclaimer language in the leads that they
mhm,
do sell to prevent resale and kind of move liability for violations downstream at the
mhm,
local level by putting in disclaimers and other things that you can't resell it, and you can't in some cases use robo dialing or robo text. That we think there's going to be additional kind of constraints put on the leads that are sent downstream to protect the aggregator. Again, the aggregator is kind of the most sophisticated party here in a lot
right.
of these relationships, right? So they have the attorneys working on their behalf to
Absolutely.
send.
I think the downstream as well, the mortgage companies or the broker shops, um, it'd be really interesting to see if someone, maybe it's you, Matthew, that provides this like guide, right? What should vendor management teams of these organizations be asking of the lead aggregators?
Yep.
What should the individual at, or a smaller broker shop, real estate agent team be asking? Like that's the whole problem with all of this stuff. There's so much regulation,
Yep.
and you also know the mortgage industry, state auditors, it's slightly different, what they're seeking in each state. But this one is obviously going to be top of mind because it's the most recent and newest. And the order actually had a number of different pieces to this, right? It was,
Mm-hmm.
the list was mandatory message blocking,
Yep.
the do not call registry applicability, email to text, the
Yep.
lead gen loophole that we talked about, text blocking.
Yep.
And so all of these things is, I don't even know how to do half this. I have to ask my 5-year-old how to use my phone most days. Um, there's a lot of things that are built in for the consumer on our devices to block it out, but the default is open.
Yep.
And Gmail's taking a lot of big. I think recently was it DCPA or something like that.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Gmail, and I think it was Yahoo or whatever email. So there are a lot of things happening behind the scenes, but we have all, as salespeople, have grown accustomed to automation,
Yep.
right? And so you have that lead generation piece, and you have all these things of like I said it and forget it, and things are going to get turned off if people, marketing teams or your compliance team, legal teams aren't making and taking action. So Matthew, I need you. We need you to be that white paper for everyone to have some kind of rule book to go from. I don't know if that was a Shark Tank idea. Maybe it's not a monetary thing for you, but it's definitely needed. We definitely need that guidance.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned that, Krish. I get asked all the time, like, well, what should I do? Like, if I'm a loan officer, or if I'm a real estate agent, or if I'm a team, like, what do I do first, second, and third, right? And so to answer your first question, like, I actually wrote a GPT-4 bot and trained it with the opinions, a bunch of background information on the council and the working group and the votes and the post-vote opinions that were read out by the commissioners. And so you can go and interact with it and ask it questions. It's not legal counsel. It's not intended to be a substitute for legal counsel, but I've actually asked it to draw a compliant form for me. And it actually produced a checkbox form that it interpreted based on the ruling directly. So just, there's some interesting stuff that we can do as an industry to help prepare folks, because the individual, everyone is fighting a lot of things, to your point right now. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we're trying to run our business, right? And so I'm an LO, I'm trying to run my business. I'm a realtor, I'm trying to run my business. I don't have time to be a legal expert on all this stuff. I don't have time to be a marketing expert. And so how can we in the industry, how can your tech tool providers, how can your brokerage or parent company, your franchisor, how can they help you, give you the tools, give you the education to be able to get out of this? The first three questions I ask Krish are, one, if I'm dependent upon any lead buying today, I figure that out. What's my exposure? Two, I say, okay, if I have exposure, where am I buying leads from? I need to get the exact flow that those leads go through and become confident that those leads are either compliant today or will be compliant tomorrow. And then through the aggregator lead flows. And then three, I look at putting in place through my franchisor or tech company, I go and talk with them to put in place some way for me to generate my own leads the same way they do. Because that's like diversification in this stuff is really, really important. As we all find out in, shocks and interest rate shocks, and we don't want to be all refis, we don't want to all, new loan origination. You need a mix, right? Absolutely. And the same thing is true in lead gen. You need a mix to drive your business.
I love that. I love that you spoke my language, right? Purchase versus refi. But so you talked a little bit about the positive impact for consumers, right? I mean, it's just, maybe we can wake up with not 2,500 text messages to vote for someone or buy a house or whatever. But on the flip side of that, I was thinking about, okay, what are the positive impacts for the folks that are purchasing these leads? And I kind of feel like maybe there's, clarity on, or maybe there's just, less tire kickers, if you will. You heard that term. The value or the potential of the conversion of the lead is greater. It's still speed to lead and all of those pieces. But if you've kind of, from a marketing standpoint, if they're as a lead aggregator, they've given 20 options, okay, it comes down to your brand at that point, right? If they've heard of Kind or they've heard of the next person, those are the ones they're going to select. So this is preconceived kind of marketing tactic that would lead them to check that particular box. Or, and I'm just throwing this out there, or the lead purchaser pays for placement on the list.
Yep.
Right. And so I'm sure you guys have thought about all of those pieces, but so there is positive impact there. Because while it's a kind of a wrench and what have you, if there's now an opportunity to be kind of prime positioned at the top, and there are some great websites that already did that and do that.
Yeah, so, you're right. If I in that blank checkbox form where you have to explicitly in the new world opt in and check, I want to talk with Krish from Kind Lending, I'm going to expect Krish to call me and text me. And so therefore you can just naturally expect that the lead quality will be much higher than it would have been before. And the hope is that applies across all of these digital engagements over time. So now we get back to more of shaking hands in person, more of the referral level quality, because the volume goes down, but the quality goes way up. And so that's the balance. But I think it's very astute of you to mention, I've heard this mentioned by a couple of our portal partners, this idea of, sort order, where do you appear in the list? How do you get higher? A lot of the concierge systems, lead concierge systems in residential real estate, for instance, will give folks
Mm-hmm.
more leads to work,
Right.
if they're faster to respond, if they get higher ratings, if they have higher conversion percentages, if they do higher price points, right? And so those are going to be interesting models to look at. How many reviews do you have? How is your online reputation? How is your brand, to your point, Krish? And I think those all become interesting determinants of whether you get the consumer to check your box or whether it goes to someone else's.
Absolutely. There's a different world. I mean, it's still very archaic that people buy lists.
Mm-hmm.
People buy lists, and I know people that buy lists. And recruiting world is a hot thing, right? Um, and so how does that a factor into all of this? Because while a lot of it becomes public data, right? There's a lot of websites that you can download and export. Um, it's public data, but they didn't consent to be marketed to or to be recruited. And so how do you see that fitting into this world?
Well, so this, by the way, so even though housing, mortgage, and real estate were mentioned directly by one of the commissioners in the readout. In fact, that commissioner, Krish, was a dissenter. Was the one no vote. It was like 4-1. You probably saw
Wow.
that 4-1 vote. He was the no vote. And when you read his opinion, it's really interesting. His no vote was not a vote for spam. It was he agreed with the general philosophy of the ruling, but he was concerned about its impact on small and medium-sized SMBs, and in particular real estate and mortgage, right? And so it's interesting, as they went through the process, they actually thought about that, and he was so concerned that he voted against the
Wow.
fixing a spam problem because he was worried about the impact on folks who rely on these leads every day. So that said, we think that a lot of this stuff is still forming itself, right? And some things won't even be known until there are lawsuits, unfortunately. But we think your leads that you already have are grandfathered in. So if you already have leads that are, check with counsel, if you're a big company, we want to figure it out. It's true for all this, but that's what we in the industry and who are following this stuff closely think. You're going to be grandfathered in with the leads you have. It's not certain, but that's what we think. And so if you've already gotten leads and you're marketing, they're kind of like your existing customers, your existing leads, right? And so you're able then, without additional consent, to market to them. There are some schools of thought that say if you're offering additional services or upselling, then maybe those new contacts apply. But no one really knows the answer to that yet. It's all kind of being fought on the battleground of interpretation. So I think those are interesting considerations when you think about your database that you have today versus what you're going to gather, leads from in the future.
So if you're we're CRM people. A lot of sales folks across industries are sales. Evocalize has its own respective CRM. Do you see an impact on technology that supports leads, right? From the drip campaigns and all that stuff, from auditing and all of that. Is that a conversation that's being had today?
Yeah, and in fact, there were already, Krish, some rules and some software platforms and some of the big platforms like Google and Meta have come out with new functionality to support some of this stuff. But there was already some requirement to track the lead form and the lead consent, and in some cases even video it so that you can track the lead submission process and have proof for the submission. So I think some of that stuff is going to get even more advanced and be a part of the logging and audit trail of the whole flow, from initial marketing all the way through. Because if you think about the context rule that I mentioned earlier, where whatever you market with, that context has to carry through to the people buying your lead, so that if you're marketing rates and rate comparisons, according to this rule, you can't take that, bundle it up, and sell it to a home improvement store, even if the consumer says, I want to hear from the home improvement store, because it's a different context, right?
Sure.
Now there's a nuance in that, but I think all of those things will spawn additional tooling up and down the process that basically follows and logs the consumer's actions to make sure that there's a compliance aspect.
I love that you mentioned Google and Meta specifically, because I believe they're probably right now on the Hill somewhere, making cases and being reprimanded. But
Zuckerberg's getting yelled at as we
yeah,
speak, I think,
for valid
unfortunately.
reasons, and there's a lot of different opinions there. But what I find interesting is, so Google and Meta are two of the largest places where the lead aggregators go to source the leads, right?
Right.
And we know that after Cambridge Analytica, Facebook made some really big changes that were heavily impacting the housing and mortgage industries, as far as then you add redlining and all of these other things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like we have the organic opportunity to? It's still pretty costly and difficult now to generate leads. But the aggregators that use those two places, are they now going to see a reverse effect from those providers on those platforms to make it even difficult for you to get those leads? Like, cost is going up in every place.
Well, it'll be interesting, Krish, to see the level to which this impacts the number of leads that are out there. There are some folks that I don't necessarily share this belief in terms of the extremity of the impact, but there's some folks that think that 90% of the leads are going away. That really, because there's such a high volume that's generated from the aggregators themselves, that those are just going to dry up, and they're going to be 90% fewer leads in circulation, kind of like dollars in circulation, right? Leads in circulation. I'm not sure that it'll have that big of an impact. I think it'll have a pretty sizable impact on the percentage of leads that are generated. The question that then, if you think about a lead aggregator, what they've always done, their ability to resell a lead 20, 30, 50, 100, 200 times in some cases has given them a lot of money that they can then pipe into marketing in Google and Meta and TikTok, which is the largest place that they go to generate leads, right? So they go to where people are, and they pull someone in, and then they monetize the heck out of it. And that's like a virtuous cycle, right? The more they monetize, the more money they have, the more they can pipe it into marketing, the more people come in, the more leads they generate. And so that's why this business model, lead aggregation, has been one of the most successful and profitable in the history of the world, right? Like these people are printing money in a lot of cases. It's incredible, right? So the question then becomes, if that's defunded, because I think there's some expectation that will be defunded to some extent. They'll have less money to spend on marketing, and the unwind of this virtual cycle will start. If that's true, there's less money and competition for lead generation going into Google, Meta, TikTok, and then that allows the smaller guy, the one-to-one, to compete again on a lead generation, one-to-one lead generation basis. So that's an interesting thing. We'll have to see play out, but I can buy into some of that speculation. When there's a large online consumer direct lender that pulled back for some legal reasons they were spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars a year lead generation in the mortgage industry. This was about a year ago. They pulled back for a couple months, basically brought it to zero, and you saw an impact. We saw an impact for our customers. CPMs dropped, the cost of media dropped, the cost of leads dropped. Like, everything got better in terms of the auction because they pull back. So if that happens at mass scale, it could be really good for the individuals who are able to build these relationships one-to-one and get their own leads generated.
So this was a question, Matt, that I got. I only got 2 questions, by the way, on my TikTok. I don't run a huge TikTok place, but the second one, I'll elaborate on it. But going back to, they think that the annual harm was about $20 billion in the United States. So I would assume that the income generated, revenue generated from lead generation has to be at least 20x that. You're talking about $500 billion. $500 billion.
Yep.
In the United States alone. So the question that came in is, if this is a regulation, a rule in the United States, and we've seen this time and time again, what is to stop that the defunding to be replicated internationally and then sold back into the United States? What's preventing that?
Well, so it's a really good question, and I've talked about it a little bit at this point. No, the answer on a lot of this, unfortunately, is no one knows for sure. But
right.
But I think that when you read some of the working groups discussion points over the course of the past year, you start to uncover some of the reasons why they included things beyond just closing the lead aggregator loophole, like we've been mostly focusing on today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the other points you made earlier, Krish, on that apply to the telecom providers. One of the things that you touched on briefly, but I'll just double click on here, I think is important. The telecom providers will now have more ability and more responsibility to crack down on foreign, non-US telephone robocalls and automated texts. And so if you think about the ability to farm that out, that may be one of the intentions of those other bullets, is to like prevent that. These people had more than a year to work on this, and you and I are coming up with these things. So you have to, hopefully give a little bit of credit that all of the people they interviewed, all the digging they did, that these things connect together. And I think that they do. So I think that's the hope, is that these telecom providers, the T-Mobiles, AT&Ts of the world, are being held to have some responsibility in turning folks off. And you see this already taking effect with the Twilios and the platforms that enable people to email and text folks. They're getting more stringent on and people see this. People are seeing this in the industry already, where their texts are being throttled and things are happening, because I think everyone's worried about the telecom shutting them off.
That's a really good point, because as our audience listens to this, they might not see the entire cycle of how that lead goes from one place to another, and if there's those stops and those measures created, it prevents the full cycle from even being completed, right? So I think that's a really good breakdown for us. So I did want to give a little bit of background on you before we wrap up. I should have done this at the beginning, Matthew, but you've had an incredible career thus far. You're the CEO, founder of Evocalize.
Stop it.
But before I get into that, before we started the call, he's like, "Man, I feel underdressed. You're wearing a tie," and I told you I'd get back to it. Our CEO, Glenn Stearns, we're pretty laid back at Kind. We're doing things out of the box. We're doing things different, and we've all been remote for so dang long, Matt. And so I've started going into the office, and I started dry cleaning my shirts, which I haven't done since 2020. I'll say they looked a little crusty. And I found this shoebox, because we moved from Atlanta to Texas in 2020, and I found the shoebox of all my bow ties and my ties. So I started whipping them out. So we get on the executive call, and Glenn's like, in the corporate office, I'm remote, and he's like, "Man, I'm gonna start wearing a tie." So now, like, it's a thing. Like, we're all like wearing ties more frequently, and because those days are gone. The water cooler conversations, or hey, I like your shoes, I like your hat, I like your tie. We don't do that anymore. So I started wearing them. Even Shelby, one of our marketing managers, on the back end of this call, she said today, she goes, "Wow," or yesterday, "You look snazzy in that tie." I was like, "Yeah, that's the feel I was." And it's a anyway. So try it.
You look sharp, man. You're doing it right. You're doing it right.
You.
I might have to Monday put on my put on a tie just to copy that sentiment a little bit. And
I haven't left the house in 3 days, so it's kind of like my wife said, "This is laundry just piling up." I'm like, I'm just going all out for my calls every day. But so Matthew, you worked at Bazaarvoice.
Yeah.
You founded more than one company, I believe.
I've been involved in a number of things. I was on the senior leadership team. I wasn't a founder. Great entrepreneurs at Bazaarvoice, which is a marketing tech company that they took public in 2012, and I was fortunate to be a part of that process. Really, really fun process. That company grew very, very fast, and so. I've had a varied career, Krish, and I've done a lot of different things: strategy consulting and started as an software engineer, and product management, and all kinds of things. So I'm fortunate to have a little bit of that background. It helps, in the day to day, running, raising money and building a venture-backed software company, and figuring out how to position it, and figuring out how to solve real problems and help real people and talk about it. So I've been fortunate. I've been fortunate in the background to go through some of that. And, Evocalize is the kind of the fun ride. We've been building it for a while, and we're really excited to, we started out in real estate, working with the largest portals there. That's how we built our tech. And then we said, well, what if we could take that portal tech and bring it to everyone through their parent company or through their technology provider? And so we started embedding, and now we're crossing industries, as you mentioned earlier, and going, we've made a big push in mortgage, and working with a lot of lenders there and tech companies, and then travel and restaurants and fitness, and a bunch of other industries. Yeah. Everyone needs local digital marketing, and for a local marketer to have a marketing expert, a PhD in marketing, and a data scientist in the back pocket of everyone through the technology wrapper, that's what we aim to do with this.
I think that we can't escape technology, right? Our salespeople in real estate and in mortgage are technology hungry. They are respectively their own, they're entrepreneurs, and they're their own CEO founders. They're the leaders of their success. And we do a lot of that, like mindset and vibe, two of our own events here at Kind, and we talk about it, right? We're like, hey, how do you get through the pressures of day to day? How do you build when your 2023 was the most unpredicted, craziest, unprecedented year in the history of mortgage and real estate? And then you have partners like Evocalize and yourself. I've met with a lot of your team members over the years. I know a lot of them. I was on your podcast.
I know you were. It was an amazing pod.
Maybe 6 months ago. And so there's a lot of collaboration happening. And I'm really fortunate to have had you on this podcast. Hopefully, anyone that's listening today, continue to ask questions. It is on Spotify, YouTube, eventually everywhere but podcasts can and should live. But this conversation isn't going away. This is a right now, real time opportunity to kind of arm yourself with the right tools to keep going, right? And that's what it's about. So Matthew, thank you so much. And we have a little saying. Usually I forget. It's so funny. It's like someone from the back end will type it in. It's like, hey, this way. But I say, stay curious and keep marketing, because that's exactly what we want our folks, listeners, to be doing. So stay curious and keep marketing. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Krish. Appreciate it.